Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. I'm Mark McClellan. I'm the director of the Duke-Margolis Institute for Health Policy, and I'd like to welcome you to our workshop, the second annual Future of Prescription Drug Promotion and Digital Marketing meeting. This is being held by Duke-Margolis, convened in conjunction with our partners at the FDA's Office of Prescription Drug Promotion. During this virtual workshop, we'll have two sessions with presentations and moderated discussion exploring the state of digital prescription drug promotion, including the marketing technologies and strategies currently available and commonly used by marketers, as well as insights on the future direction of marketing in this space. We're very pleased to have brought together an array of experts in their fields of marketing, media, industry, and prescription drug promotion, as well as those who can speak to the experiences of patients, consumers, and healthcare providers to discuss how trends in the digital marketing space may affect public health. Before we begin these timely and important sessions, I'd like to go over a few considerations for our discussion, as well as some housekeeping notes. Here is a short note about our commitment to academic independence and to avoiding taking partisan positions in our work. You can find more about our policies at Duke-Margolis at the links on this slide. And I also want to disclose that I'm an independent director on the boards of Alignment Healthcare, Cigna, Johnson & Johnson, and Prognomic. Here are a few points about our meeting format that will help us organize discussion in this virtual setting. We want to remind you that meeting materials are available on the Duke-Margolis event website. As our speakers come from a wide range of backgrounds and the topics we're covering today are diverse, our team has provided a glossary for attendees to refer to with working definitions of terminology that may be heard throughout the day. A member of our team will drop a link to that document in the Zoom chat for ease of reference. And if you would like to ask a question or make a comment at any time during the presentations and the open discussion portions of the meeting, please type it into the Zoom Q&A box. We'll try to cover as many as possible, but please be aware that due to the substantial number of meeting participants, we may not be able to get to every question. A recording of this meeting will be available on the Duke-Margolis event website and YouTube channel after the conclusion of the event. And finally, the Duke-Margolis Institute is convening today's meeting in collaboration with the FDA. This is not a Federal Advisory Committee meeting. While we are very interested in your input and the input from all of our participants on this topic, we won't be following advisory committee procedures or taking a vote or reaching consensus at the end of the meeting. The meeting will be a success if there's a frank exchange of lots of ideas and open discussion of those issues and their implications for the future. Thanks again for joining us today and for contributing to what we expect will be an informative and productive discussion. With that, I'd like to go through today's agenda. For this workshop, we will have opening remarks from our colleagues at FDA, followed by two sessions of presentations and open discussion. Session 1 will cover the future of television marketing. Panelists will talk about how ad pricing on linear versus streaming TV impacts decision-making around promotional content and what anticipated trends may mean for public health. We'll then take a short break, and then returning from that break, session 2 will cover endorsements and disclosures in digital formats. During this session, speakers will consider recommendations related to the regulation of promotional communications for prescription drug products, while also exploring areas for future research based on disclosure practices from other market segments. Some examples discussed during this session may include disclosures made by independent parties who are not compensated spokespersons and whose speech does not represent regulated promotional communication. Finally, we'll have some brief closing remarks, and then we'll adjourn today's event at 3:45 p.m. Eastern Time. All right, let's get started. I'd like to introduce Dr. Katie Gray, who will make opening remarks on behalf of the FDA. Dr. Gray is the director of the Office of Prescription Drug Promotion within the Office of Medical Products and FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. Katie, thanks very much for joining us and for your ongoing efforts on prescription drug promotion and digital marketing.
Thank you, Mark. I'd like to echo Mark's welcome to all. Thank you for joining us at this important panel discussion. I'm once again delighted to join so many researchers, patient advocates, and industry experts coming together today to talk about the future of prescription drug digital promotion, a critically important area of advertising that is central to FDA's mission to protect the public health. At FDA, we work to ensure that the public receives accurate, science-based information about the approved and cleared medical products they use. In the Office of Medical Policy and the Office of Prescription Drug Promotion, or OPDP, we strive to foster better communication of prescription drug information with patients and healthcare providers with the goal of supporting well-informed decisions about treatment options. OPDP focuses its efforts on protecting the public health by helping to ensure that prescription drug information directed at both consumers and healthcare providers is truthful, balanced, and accurately communicated. We accomplish this charge through comprehensive surveillance, compliance, education, research, and policy development programs. Last year's public workshop on the future of prescription drug digital promotion provided many insights into both the current state and the future of digital advertising. And that's why I'm thrilled once again to join with the Duke-Margolis Institute for Health Policy and engage with such a diverse group of perspectives and experiences during this year's workshop. As a science-based agency, FDA relies on science and data to guide our actions. It is equally important to consider the insights and experiences of patients, consumers, and healthcare providers who are on the front lines each and every day. We can develop a deeper understanding of individual experiences by sharing not only our collective perspectives and insights, but also our challenges and our aspirations. Understanding novel and emerging market technologies from the perspective of patients and healthcare providers helps FDA gain a better understanding of how to frame information. It also provides insights on where to place that information to ensure consumers can readily access truthful, reliable, and accurate information about their medicines and their health. Since last year's meeting, the digital marketing landscape has continued to evolve, and new marketing platforms, technologies, and strategies have emerged. Despite the constant change in this space, it's important to remember the experiences of the individual. We all consume, perceive, and comprehend digital media and entertainment differently. Perception and comprehension of digital marketing is not monolithic. Some may quickly adopt the new, while others may stay with the established and familiar outlet. Understanding both legacy and emerging technologies is equally important as understanding how viewers experience the digital environment at an individual level. Over the course of this meeting, we will explore a broad range of topics across television and digital settings. While consumers continue to increasingly turn to streaming platforms, we'll explore the market drivers that led to streaming churn, the phenomena of streaming viewers constantly changing their subscriptions from platform to platform, and how this impacts the format and presentation of advertising across streaming. We'll explore how viewership data is collected, analyzed, and applied to target specific demographics and consumer groups, and how the state of viewership data continues to evolve in the streaming era. Further, the use of influencers and product endorsers across social media and wider digital formats has continued to expand since last year's meeting. Like television and streaming, consumer perceptions and comprehension of influencers and endorser disclosures vary across a wide array of factors. Viewer perceptions may be influenced by individual experiences with social networks, overall familiarity with digital formats, and the contextual background understanding developed from following influencer posts. Today's meeting will seek to understand how patients, consumers, and healthcare providers view and comprehend endorsement disclosures presented across digital formats, and how perspectives from other market segments can help inform disclosures for the promotion of prescription drug products. With that said, it's important to remember that legacy media and advertising still influence and inform the perceptions and understanding of emerging digital formats. While technology continues to change, many aspects of media and advertising remain the same. Understanding individual perceptions and comprehension of both legacy and emerging marketing formats help us to develop insights into the overall marketing landscape and the experience of individuals and groups. While new formats and presentations in digital settings have expanded the ability to inform and opened the door to possibilities we could only previously imagine, we must ensure that we are not leaving behind any demographic or consumer groups that may not experience digital promotion in the same way as others. Once again, the digital marketing landscape is presenting us with complex challenges. Through the diversity of your insights, perspectives, and experiences, we will develop a richer understanding of individual experiences to ensure that no groups are overlooked and left behind by the rapid changes in this space. As I close, it's important to note that new and emerging marketing formats and channels do not change the regulatory requirements. Prescription drug promotion must be accurate, must maintain fair balance, and must be truthful and non-misleading. These tenets must be the leading considerations for marketers who are developing promotional content on digital settings. While emerging formats and platforms introduce exciting opportunities to reach and connect with new audiences, they also present new challenges to marketers. With the second meeting on digital advertising, OPDP again leans into the how, the why, and what it means to patients, consumers, and healthcare providers as we continue to regulate in this space. It is incumbent upon all of us to ensure that consumers, patients, and healthcare providers are presented with truthful, reliable, and accurate information. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for sharing our passion for public health and our deep interest in the future of promotion and digital marketing. I look forward to the informative and thought-provoking presentations and panels ahead. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie, for those opening remarks and getting us started off on the right foot and sort of framing the day. My name is Nancy Allen LaPointe. I'm an adjunct associate professor of medicine at Duke University and a faculty fellow at the Duke-Margolis Institute for Health Policy. I have the privilege of moderating this first session titled The Future of Television Marketing: Economic Drivers of Promotion, Practices, and Impacts on Public Health. In this session, we'll be building upon some of the great conversations that took place in last year's meeting, but more specifically this year, we're going to focus on the economics of television advertising and audience metrics in this session. We've got a great group of panelists for the session, so I think it's going to be a great discussion. To kick things off for session one, we're going to start with a presentation from Marian Barrett. Dr. Barrett is an associate professor emerita of journalism and mass communication at Arizona State University, where she conducts research on television audience behavior. So welcome Marian to the screen to start us off with her presentation.
Okay, so thank you very much, Nancy. I'm really delighted to be here. What I'm going to do today in this very short presentation is just talk a little bit about where we are in terms of how the audience is split across media. And then I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about the challenges of measurement. And just right off the bat, I'll say that the holy grail of television audience measurement remains a significant challenge, particularly in accurately measuring audiences as they move across panels. So there's been a lot of activity in this space over the last couple of years. A lot of new players have entered the market, some more established than others. So I'm going to begin by just showing you a breakout of where the audience currently is. So next slide. So the source that I'm using for the next couple of slides is Nielsen. This is publicly available information. It has this new tool called the Gauge, which is a pretty frequent newsletter that updates us on the state of television audiences and where they are. So in this first slide, you'll see, and I'm not going to read them to you because obviously you're more than capable of reading it for yourselves, but I'm just to point out a couple of things that streaming is taking. I mean, this should come as no surprise to any of us who have been working in this space for a while, but streaming is taking up more and more of the pie in terms of television audience viewing, because we only have so many hours in the day. So that pie is not likely to expand. It's just how it gets divided is what's changing. Not constantly, because it's been pretty flat for at least the last year. So next slide, please. So in the previous chart, you saw the other. And what other refers to is things that are things like gaming, use of DVD devices, and unmeasured streaming. So I thought you might find it interesting to see a smaller breakout of where streaming is. I mean, where viewers who are using streaming as their sources, where they tend to go. Some of it is shouldn't be surprising, or maybe it is, that YouTube is by far the most popular streaming platform. I think whether you see YouTube as a streaming platform, I think depends in part on age. For me, I always have to be reminded that it's a streaming platform, because I tend to think more in terms of Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max, or whatever it's going by this week, because it's HBO Max in particular has undergone a lot of changes over the last couple of years. So this is just, again, a breakout of where that other is going. Okay, next slide. I'm sorry, where the streaming is going. So this is a year-to-year trend. You'll see that there's not a whole lot of fluctuation, although you see that streaming in August of 23 accounted for about 38% of total of television audience viewing, and now it accounts for 41%. Most of that loss is coming from broadcast, which shouldn't be surprising. And I think broadcasters for a while, particularly the three broadcast networks, maybe NBC in particular, have been pretty aggressive in terms of moving into the streaming space. So again, we haven't seen a whole lot of change over the year, but I think it is instructive to see how it breaks out. Next slide, please. And then this is an older slide. So the slides I just went through were are pretty current. They're from this month, from September. This is a couple of years old. So I suspect that, although I don't have any solid evidence to support it, but I suspect that share of people 65 plus who use streaming has increased. So again, if we look at this chart, it shouldn't be too surprising in terms of age groups. I think one thing to point out that isn't clear from this slide is that people 35 to 44 actually watch a lot more television than other groups do, because this is the age group that tends to have young children in the home. Okay, so again, I just wanted to give you a picture of where the audience is, how it breaks out in terms of streaming service, and then how it breaks out by age. Next slide, please. So now I want to talk a little bit about some measurement updates and some key players. And I'll start with Nielsen. Nielsen, as I'm sure you're well aware of, for a long time has been the go-to player in terms of television audience measurement, both at the local level and at the national level. COVID, Nielsen had a lot of issues with its panels during COVID, which should be easily understandable, because with us being so cautious about COVID, with a lot of social distancing, it was obviously a lot more difficult for Nielsen to recruit families and then to have people go into people's homes and install the measurement devices. So because of that, in September of 2021, Nielsen's accreditation by the Media Rating Council was suspended. And that suspension lasted for over a year and a half. And so during that period, because during that suspension was not only a wake-up call for Nielsen, but it also gave new entrants a lot of opportunities because as Nielsen, again, was kind of sitting at the sidelines as it needed to pay attention to what it needed to do in order to regain accreditation. So in January of 2023, Nielsen launched its One Ads, which was a cross-platform deduplicated measurement system. It was in beta for a long time. I think I think industry participants are still a little nervous about its accuracy. And then a few months after that, in April of 2023, Nielsen was reaccredited as it was able to get back on track in terms of how it was recruiting participants for its various panels. And at the same time, Nielsen launched Nielsen One Contact. So Nielsen One Ads is obviously measuring viewing to ads, and Nielsen One Content is measuring viewing to content. Next slide, please. So these are a couple of the new players. ComScore has been around for a while. Actually, some of these other players have also been around for a while, but they really just came to prominence during COVID, and particularly after Nielsen lost its accreditation was suspended in September 2021. So iSpot TV, according to its website, is a unified measure of streaming, TV, and social video. It's been around for about 10 years, but as I said, it came to prominence on the heels of Nielsen's COVID issues and its reaccreditation suspension. ComScore Mobile measures website and app usage, and then ComScore TV measures local and national TV using different panels. The challenge of all of this is to, do you have apples to apples comparisons across these platforms, or do you have apples to oranges platforms? Is what you're getting from iSpot TV, is that the same as what you're getting from ComScore TV? And I think it presents a significant economic challenge for industry and for advertisers. And how many of these services do you need to subscribe to in order to get the data that you need in order to make good, valid, reliable decisions? Next slide, please. And then there is also the U.S. Joint Industry Committee, and that was formed, again, following or on the heels of Nielsen's accreditation issues. It was formally formed in early 2023, but discussions about it had been floating around for a while before that. In the same year, it developed a currency certification program, which is similar to the Media Ratings Council, and to just look at various of these new players in the television audience measurement space and decide whether or not what they're measuring is reliable and valid. So in April of this year, it certified ComScore and Video Amp, and then just recently it certified iSpot TV. So this is, again, just a very brief overview of the state of the industry and state of audiences, but hopefully it will help inform our discussion. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Marianne. That was a great presentation and a great way to start our session off. We're now going to move into our discussion section of session one, where we'll be joined by 3 additional panelists, and I invite all of them to join me on screen here. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Dr. Janelle Applequist, who is Associate Professor of Advertising and Public Relations in the Zimmerman School of Advertising and Mass Communications at the University of South Florida. Next, we're joined by Dr. Katie Graham, Managing Director of McCoy Consulting and lecturer on promotional regulatory considerations at multiple schools of pharmacy. And finally, we have Dr. Paul Hartert, Clinical Professor of Marketing at NYU Stern School of Business and Academic Director of the Berkeley Center for Entrepreneurship. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining this panel. We do have a number of discussion questions lined up for today's panel, which you'll see on the screen right now. We're going to get to those in a minute, and one of the we will be posting these in the chat for the Zoom chat, so folks can refer back to them as well. But we wanted to kick this session off with giving each of our additional panelists a few minutes to sort of introduce some of their top level comments or thoughts. I also do want to remind the audience that you can submit questions, and I've seen a couple come in already, but you can submit your questions in the Zoom chat for the, and we will try to get to as many of those as possible, work them in with the discussion questions. So I'm going to start off with our kind of round robin of our additional panelists, and I'm going to start with Paul. Do you want to go ahead and kick us off?
Sure. Thanks. Nice to be here. I appreciate it. You know, the interesting thing we all know from our own habits is most people don't like to watch ads. They like to avoid ads. So the problem is that's the way the business works. You need advertising. We need our attention. So you just have to keep in mind that finding ways to reach people, it's increasingly difficult. We all know from our own lives that it's very challenging to hold our attention, right? It's almost like an arms race. We're pretty good at figuring out when to pause something or leave the room. And so for advertising to be effective, we have to be sure that it's well targeted and it is presented to places where people will actually engage with the advertisement. And that's the challenge, right? And the ideal scenario is you have the perfect match of the ad with the person who's interested in it, and then they will be engaged with it. And as we all know, right, when I see an ad for whatever, a women's shampoo, that is a waste of money by the advertiser. I'm not interested, and I'm the wrong person for it. So I think efficiency and targeting is going to be a big part of it, and also figuring out a way to either integrate it into the programming or find a way that people will actually pay attention.
Great. Thanks, Paul.
Sure.
Now I'm going to turn to Janelle.
Thank you. I guess just top level comments. I really appreciated Catherine's, Katie's opening remarks about not leaving any demographic behind. I think right now things are evolving so quickly. It's really easy to look at the shiny new toy, which of course is social media. You could even say AR, VR, XR, MR, all of these things that are really exciting. But at the end of the day, I think it's really important to consider what is intriguing to folks or what, they're still connecting with. And if we look at just spend for drug manufacturers and advertisers, TV spend has actually increased since 2020. And it's not just, we haven't also seen a bit of a decline in digital spend. It's not because of COVID, which a lot of people think. It's because we still have some significant privacy concerns and the ways that data are being collected, or, so some things that are prohibiting data from folks like Google, Apple, et cetera. And so I think TV is still a great way to tell a story. One of the challenges that we're going to see is the amount of time that we have to do that. And so that's where I think advertisers can really start to get creative. And the narrative is a really powerful way that we can do that. And so I think that that's a really interesting area that we can start to consider. Another one that I think should be on the table is just this idea of synced advertising, which to me is really interesting. given the previous comments, because synced advertising kind of meets all demographics where they're at. If you're considering broadcast, linear, over the top, connected TV, however, you get your television content, right? So that's kind of considering everything on the table. And so it allows us via Nielsen, ComScore, whoever it is, to kind of get the data and have access to the KPIs, the ROI. So I think synced advertising is something that we should really be considering, not only now, but in the future as well, the near future.
And I don't want to get into a lot of definitions or trying to drill down on definitions, but could you just kind of, for our audience, give just a quick, what do you mean by synced advertising?
It allows us to kind of look at audiences and measure them across platforms. So for example, with an entity like Nielsen, I could be given an ad on broadcast TV. So if I just watched Wheel of Fortune, and then let's say I move over to YouTube TV, I get fed another ad, and then I move to my mobile and I'm streaming something there, I get fed another ad. So it's a form of integrated marketing communications where a drug manufacturer could effectively feed me an ad from 3 different sources. We could see how it performed across each and then do the same ad or different types, but we're syncing that content either effectively or ineffectively based on the performance. But it's a new way really to explore TV advertising for drug manufacturers or really any product category, no matter how you slice it.
Okay, terrific. Yeah, I think that might come up more in our discussion as we go through. So I just want to make sure that we all kind of had the same starting place there. So thank you.
Yeah.
Next, Katie, if you'd please give us some high-level thoughts from your perspective.
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you guys for the opportunity to participate in today's panel. And I'm going to come in with the kind of the opposite kind of view of in the realm of broadcast advertising. When I'm working with clients, we're having to ensure, as Dr. Gray had mentioned, that things are not false or misleading, but and present a balanced view of that effectiveness and safety. But we're also having to make sure that the indication is there, and we're communicating the safety, what they consider and is called the major statement, which is really kind of summarizing the contraindications and the warnings and the adverse events in a clear and conspicuous manner, in addition to providing what is known as the adequate provision or links to the package insert. And so in order to provide this information, there's this balance that the pharmaceutical industry is having to do, because the average length of a major statement is 33 seconds, but yet the average attention span of the American population is 8 seconds. And so we have these TV ads, and everybody is moving towards streaming. And we frequently get asked by my clients to say, they want to put it in a format where you can skip over the ad in 6 seconds, or we can have these shorter ads. And how do you do that while meeting the requirements that are set forth from the FDA? And so that's something that we're constantly battling.
All right, terrific. So I think this is a great panel, because I think we've got sort of, as you said, Katie, we've got perspectives from all areas here, right? So we've got kind of sort of the consumer's view, we've got sort of an academic view, sort of a industry view of sort of safety, so across the gamut. So I think this is a terrific group to sort of have this discussion. So I'm going to turn first to our first discussion question that we had posted. And I know some of you have addressed this a little bit already, but I wanted to dive a little bit deeper, because I think especially we kind of talked about this, if some of you were able to be here last year, we talked a little bit about where is this going in the future. And, I'm kind of curious where you think trends are going now, and if your opinion has actually changed, if something changed this year. I was interested in Marianne's presentation that sort of the movement to streaming didn't seem to be very substantial over the past year. So, I mean, is that unexpected? Is that expected? Those sorts of things. So the question is, how might current and future economic pressures shape television marketing activity and or marketing trends? And I'm going to open it up to folks. I'm going to let you kind of chime in, and we can just kind of have a group discussion then.
I can start if you like. I mean,
Yeah, that'd be great.
yeah. So one of the big trends that's happening is, we all are familiar with this various streaming platforms, whether it's Netflix or Disney Plus or Amazon Prime. And most of those businesses are moving to a much more bundled experience, right? Where you're going to pay for lots of things at the same time. And additionally, a lot of them are now including advertising within, right? So for years we would get Netflix. Netflix did not have advertising at all. And when it first launched advertising, it didn't want its current users to know about it. Now they're very much actively moving to this dual revenue stream. Think of it like cable television, where you'll pay, plus you will also have advertising. So those are all elements that are addressing the economic pressures on individuals, but it also adds what they call their ARPU, their average revenue per user, where the ability to have those two revenue streams and optimize your return both on the subscription, the baseline fee you pay, and then also the advertising. For instance, a lot of these, a lot of things like sports are slowly moving away from television, linear television, and cable. And with that, most likely will go the users and, older users, who most people that still have cable, not to broadly have it because of sports. And as that content migrates to streaming, the user will migrate. And those are, major trends that will fundamentally, speed the move away from linear and cable to streaming. I don't know if that gets to a starting point.
Yeah, so it kind of sounds like there's a yin and a yang here, right? So I mean, they're trying to basically get more subscribers. You're trying to reach a larger audience. You're trying to embed ads so that you're getting that marketing to the appropriate people, but then yet prices of these things, of the subscriptions and such, are going up. And then I think also, you sometimes you have options to opt in or out of advertisement, which is a price point decision there. So how does this, when you start putting this all together, what are folks looking at, these developers, marketing agencies, et cetera? What are they looking at as to what is the right sort of a series of things, or the right equation to get to with that balance? And Paul, you don't have to be the only one to answer.
Yeah,
Anybody can jump in.
Yeah, I think they're still trying to sort that. Out. A big economic factor is, the affordability. And in terms of bundling, it's not only bundling by the services themselves, but now companies like Verizon will bundle you a couple of video subscriptions as part of your phone service. So I think we're still in a period of trial and error, right? And I've been really curious as to what the impact of Netflix now forbidding password sharing, what the impact of that has been. I know early on there was some uptick in the number of Netflix subscribers, but whether they were traditional Netflix subscribers or whether they were subscribers that were going more towards the ad-supported tiers because they're more affordable was an open question. So I think, for each of the players, I think they're sorting out themselves which is better which is going to work better. I get the feeling that a subscriber only model is not going to be sustainable, because in order to have a subscriber only model, the service itself is going to have to be so expensive that you're always doing this calculus of what's the breaking point in terms of increasing the number of subscribers? How far can I raise the price? How elastic is the price, right? Or how elastic is the market? How far can I raise the price without losing subscribers? So I think, again, it's very much in flux.
And what is your thought in terms of how much of that is driven by the consumers themselves? I mean, and what do you see happening over the next year or two there? I mean, is it that consumers are saying, I've had enough of watching ads and I want to back out? I think, Paul, you mentioned that earlier, that it's, again, a lot of people are looking for the way to minimize as much as possible how many ads they watch or the time they watch. which is not obviously what the streaming platforms approach is, right? They want to have more revenue. So if they have more marketing time, as well as for the people who are trying to advertise, they want to engage that audience, engage the right audience. So what are you sort of seeing over the next year or two? I mean, I know it's hard to predict, sort of where the economy is going and where other things are going, but what are you sort of thinking the direction is over the next year or two?
I mean, I can
Go ahead, Paul.
Well, first of all, in the last, I don't know, 8 months, Amazon Prime, a lot of us get Amazon Prime primarily for the free shipping, but there we also have Amazon Prime Video. Amazon Prime added advertisements just to its Amazon Prime Video. And based on my short asking of students and families, nobody cared. They were like, fine. So they added a whole new revenue stream to their 170 million Amazon Prime users, and no one cared because people get Amazon Prime for the shipping, for the discounted blueberries at Whole Foods, et cetera, that bundle. And if you think about it, we talk about Netflix and the price. Netflix is spending $18 billion a year on content. It's still a pretty good deal in terms of entertainment value for a family to be able to watch this, a vast array of high-end content. In the past, I worked at Universal. I mean, in a given year, the studio would spend $2 billion. I mean, they're spending huge amounts of money on content. So still a pretty good deal. And if you have to pay with slivers of your attention, I think most consumers it's a pretty good deal, broadly speaking. And I think I'm not sure the consumer cares that much. And I think consumers also consider themselves fairly savvy in avoiding ads. Just in the last few days, YouTube TV and Amazon said they were going to add pause ad advertising. So if you pause the show, ads will pop up. So they're figuring out ways to get our attention when it's latent and we're open to be advertised to. And I think, that's a good system in terms of being efficient of, we're going to give you this content that you want, and we're going to, the quid pro quo is we're going to take little pieces of your attention and give it to pharmaceutical companies or, medical companies, et cetera.
And another interesting piece of this is the level of churn within the streaming space, and unlike cable, where if you back when if you had cable and you tried to change your service or cut the cord, it was a battle to do that. Where now for the consumer, it's very easy. Like unsubscribe. There's nothing on Netflix that I'm particularly interested in. I'm going to, cut my subscription for a while. Oh, there's a show that I really like, or, the series that I followed pretty closely. Well, now it's back on, so now I'm going to resubscribe. So there's a lot of fluidity there. So I think for the industry as a whole, churn is a huge issue. And they don't want to make it too difficult to unsubscribe, because then there'll be a backlash about that. But I think that's another interesting piece of what goes on, and again, in that space.
Yeah, and Katie, I wanted to kind of ask you, so what Marion was just talking about, sort of that churn. So how does that impact when you're looking at developing campaign ads or marketing for prescription drugs or other things, with that churn happening in the background? Is that, how do you take that into consideration? I mean, and what are you seeing for the future with that? Does it help or hurt?
Well, I mean, it really, at the end of the day, we're going to try to make sure that the requirements that the agency has set forth are going to be met. And so we're looking at, can that balance be given in a certain time period? Is the end target audience the appropriate target audience for the patient population that was studied in the clinical trials? And calculate those aspects. So if a marketing company is going to come and they're going to say, here's our story that we want to put out. And we might say that, okay, it's good. This works in a 45-second ad or a 60-second ad, or on a website, or there's different aspects of where it can work. But they'll frequently also ask, can we put in a streaming one where you have the option to, pass over it in 6 seconds? And how in 6 seconds can you ensure that you're going to get your balance in there. There was a time period where in some ads you could say, if you said your indication, you could say your contraindication, and that provided some sort of balance that then you could skip over. That's not the environment that we're in now. So it's very hard when the average safety requirement is so long. Now, if it's a clean drug, quote unquote clean, meaning that they have less adverse side effects, then in the studies that have shown the length of the safety, the lowest ends of those ranges have been around 7 seconds. And so those drugs that have less adverse events and are cleaner, quote unquote cleaner, have more opportunity to kind of function in this space, where the ones that have more adverse events, or it's going to be harder to communicate in the variety of streaming ways.
Right. And Janelle, I wanted to get back to something you said in your opening comments. You kind of reiterated what Katie Gray had said about leaving no one behind. So in thinking through sort of the economic pressures and where this is going, how do you sort of put that into context? I mean, how do you make sure no one gets left behind, or is that inevitable?
I don't think it's inevitable. I think pairing academic research and a lot of the things that we're doing with industry is incredibly important. And I absolutely hear Katie that I expect and understand that on the industry side, there's probably a lot of confusion when it's like, you're hearing, how do we, stand true to a lot of the regulatory policies and the fair balance mandate and all of those things. I think one of the things for me that I see in my own research and research with my colleagues, and it's one of the things that I think is so incredibly important, is that good advertising and effective advertising ultimately tells a story. And that is one of the most powerful things that we have on this broadcast side. And when you couple that with the regulations that we do have, that's actually really empowering for industry. And I don't say that in a way to say, I mean that in actually quite a positive way, because that gives you guardrails and guidelines for how to be effective. I think the second panel is going to be quite interesting, because influencers, and that's a whole other basket to deal with, if you will. The ability of narrative and to capture someone's attention via a video modality with audio, etc., can be quite powerful. It's the same, feeling, and evokes the same emotions, research shows, as if you're reading a book. Someone's reading Harry Potter and you find that you're suddenly transported into another world and you aren't noticing anything else around you. What I would argue, however, and what I see in my own research and research with my colleagues, is that consumers see that these ads right now, as they are very formulaic in nature, and they're almost expecting the same strategy that all drug manufacturers are using. And so the effectiveness of that is actually decreasing. And so what I would love to see is, and I think it would actually be an effective strategy, is for a drug manufacturer to start testing different ways, and you could do it on streaming, to use the storytelling format to convey things like risk information. And I think consumers would actually respond quite positively to that. And there's ways that we can test that. But as it stands right now, they expect it. The issue with that is that they tune that information out. And while you're following the fair balance mandate, it's just not ethically right. I mean, it's not, you're not doing well by the consumers at that point, because, and I hear what Katie's saying, but I think we're kind of in this catch-22, right? Where the drug manufacturers and the FDA are doing a beautiful job trying to work together so that everyone's compliant, but compliance doesn't always, it's not always enough. We also need to make sure that the information's being well understood and actually comprehended. And so we need to get to that point. So when we talk about streaming and not leaving anyone behind, how do we make sure that as audiences are forced into streaming, because they are being forced? Look at the NFL. right? Now moving us to Peacock, they will be forced there within 3, 4, 5 years time. That is absolutely where I think we're headed. How do we find new ways in 30 seconds versus 60 seconds to convey what drug manufacturers deem the most important benefits and risks, and make sure that consumers understand that? And those are things that we have to test. It's very difficult for us to say, because every drug's different, right? And then we need to test it with different target audiences. I'm sorry, that was a very long.
May,
No.
may I add something to that? I just want to say that integration, I completely agree with what Janelle said, and that integration I think is so helpful in pulling that compelling story, but also pulling the implications and that meaning of the safety, because when you separate that safety at the end, it can be seen as minimizing, and it separates it out, and then your mind kind of does shut off. So I think it would be phenomenal to see that.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to just take a moment. I want to kind of get back to that for a second, but Paul, unfortunately, is going to have to leave us momentarily. So I wanted to give him just a couple of minutes to add any additional insight, even if it's on other discussion questions that we haven't got to yet.
Sure. Well, thank you all. And again, I apologize. I do have to go teach a class. So I otherwise would love to say it's a really interesting group. And sort of playing off of what Katie, Janelle, and also Marianne said is, the appeal of, Nielsen television ratings are cumbersome. They're, you have these Nielsen families. It's very inexact. And if you think of something like the Walt Disney Company, which has been doing this for a long time, whether that be cable or going to a movie, they've never really had a relationship with their consumer directly. With Disney Plus, they now have a direct relationship. If you have Disney Plus, they know who you are. They know when you started watching a show. They know when you stopped. So the targeting abilities have never been better, and streaming gives a great ability for that. And so the good news for some of the points that Katie was making is you can find the right audience, and you can, again, it would be probably more expensive, but you can make it so they don't have to, that they have to watch a 60-second or a 90-second ad to get to the show they want to watch if they're the right audience. And then sort of as Janelle was saying, is leaving people behind. One of the challenges is most people that have cable still, like young people, don't have cable and they don't watch linear TV. So in terms of trying to reach the largest audience, increasingly you want to find where they are. And then if it's a certain younger audience or an older audience, or whatever, there are going to be elements. So streaming does offer lots of opportunities in terms of targeting and also understanding and finding the right way to get your content to them. Sports are a really good way. People like to watch sports. They like to watch it live. That's the appeal of them. So they won't skip the ad. And if there are ways to integrate, whether it's the announcers or the scoreboard, or you can shrink the screen so the game is going on here and you have the ad here, there are ways of telling compelling stories about your products that people don't want to skip or will engage with. Good advertising people want to watch. Think of a movie trailer is effectively an ad. Now, obviously, they're really high budgets, but there are ways of reaching people with advertising in an effective way. I'm so sorry I have to go, but it's I wish I could say, because it's really interesting and you all done a really nice job. So I appreciate your time and thanks for including me.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul.
My pleasure. Sorry to leave again. Take care.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Cheers.
So I did want to kind of get back to a little bit of what we were talking about before we get into the audience metrics, because I think this sort of next question kind of bridges into that a little bit, and I think it gets back to Janelle, your comment on the sinking advertising. Remember, I told you we would get back to this, and it's about the question that has come up: if the same ad is presented to the same consumer across 3 different channels, and the consumer acts after the 3rd presentation, how do you attribute credit across each of the 3 channels?
Well, with synced advertising, you really need them to be acting on each in order to be fed the next, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So each gets attributed individually. That's kind of how synced advertising works, if that makes sense. So the broadcast ad would get its own attribution, streaming ad would get its own attribution. And then what's nice about that data is you get a holistic picture of that entire synced advertising experience for the marketer. So what I like about that example is we're not saying, is it linear TV or broadcast TV versus streaming? It's more, how do we combine them together for the experience for the consumer to meet everyone where they're at right now. Because we can't predict the future, but I think we kind of can see where things are headed. But for right now, how do we look at more of that holistic view, if that makes sense?
Okay, all right, terrific. So now I'm going to move into question number 2, and this is about the availability or lack of data and audience metrics and how that impacts the venue and format of promotional content. So and I guess just to sort of level set for everyone, I mean, I hear a lot of talk about, you know, targeting ads to certain programs, to certain demographics, those sorts of things, which obviously means you have to know who the audience is, right? But then I've also heard that we may not have tremendous audience metrics. So how do we reconcile that, and what's happening in that space right now? Marian, did you want to start off with?
Yeah, I think that, yeah, it's a really good, it's a very, very good question. I'm kind of stumped because there's so many issues with the measurement, right? In terms of whether you're looking at a Nielsen panel and it goes to privacy issues, and it goes to, you know, very significant research issues in terms of how, you know, not to get into the weeds, but how are you calculating error, right? So you might, to me, I presume, rightly or wrongly, I presume there's something different about a household that will allow Nielsen in and allow Nielsen to attach a measuring system to its devices. So there's something different about that household than one who doesn't, right? Just as there's differences between people who will respond to polls and those who won't. So how do you get at that? For me, I think the jury is really still out on Nielsen 1. And the synced ads, I think, are really critical, and the ability to track that audience across platforms. And some of this for me just goes back to my own experience in terms of how I started watching a particular program. I watched it on a cable, and then I wanted to go back to the beginning. So then I watched it on DVD, and then I was transitioning between media. How do you measure that? And I think the jury is still very much out on that. So I think there are better ways of knowing where the audience is in terms of passive measurement. So among the ways that Nielsen measures audiences is just for households that subscribe to cable, that it's got one way of measuring that. The other measurement issue is associated with whether services are allowing their audiences to be measured. So for me, there's a lot of confusion in the space. As I said before, there's a lot of opportunities for new players to enter, but I think we're still trying to figure. Some of them are measuring the same thing, but some of them are measuring different things. So how do we pull it all together? I think it's a real challenge for advertisers and for advertisers, for people who are trying to help advertisers. And that's a very long-winded answer, but I don't know. I think there are just really significant measurement issues, and so you have to really be conscious of what you're looking at, what's being measured, how it's being measured. Yeah. Janelle, you want to jump in there?
I think it's we're at a really interesting point. Broadcast TV is so it's an estimate at best, right? Because someone could be out of the room and have the television on. And so that's always fascinating to me. Streaming services, we know that they're collecting some data because that's how the algorithm works. And we get recommendations on, all the trashy reality TV that I watch. And so that's how everything keeps popping up to me. So I think it's interesting where advertisers now are in a position that they, to some extent, can be sure in their negotiating phases with streaming services like Hulu, YouTube TV, et cetera, to ensure on that front end, what data are we going to get back? Now, the ethics of that, and we know that there are significant privacy concerns for consumers and how their data are being used, even if they've consented on the front end when signing up for said services. That's another conversation to be had. However, there is, if we have a choice between broadcast and streaming, the data capabilities and collection with streaming are far superior, in my opinion, I would say. Not only to see your KPIs, but to be able to then personalize ads in the future. There is a tipping point at which we know consumers get really creeped out with that personalization. And I would think really with health ads and with pharmaceutical ads, we know you want to be really careful with using data to personalize. You don't want to typically do that with health. You can do it with food, with fashion, things like that, but you want to be careful with this product category. But I think it would be useful to use the data to start. I don't know if it was Katie who was saying this, forgive me, and you can speak to this, but to get more creative, like using QR codes, perhaps more interactive ads, choose your own adventure ads, things like that on the streaming platform. So I think that using this data to inform future strategy would be quite helpful. And I know that it's there. I just think it's incumbent upon media planners to negotiate more effectively and as effectively as possible with the streaming platforms as to how to make that happen.
Yeah,
Go
ahead.
To just add one point to what Janelle just said in terms of the demographics. In one of the slides I presented, you saw that about 50% of people 65 plus, which I'm sure is a significant audience for drug companies, 2 years ago, 50% of that demographic was used streaming services. So even though that's the audience for broadcast skews old, and the larger share of broadcast audience is going to be, not necessarily people 55 plus, but certainly an older audience. Broadcast isn't the only place where that older audience is. So if it's 65, if 50% of people 65 plus are using streaming, there was a larger share, a pretty significant share of people who are 45 to 55 or 55 to 65 who are using streaming. So to me, I think for a long time we've thought of, older people only go to broadcast. Broadcast is only for older. So, and to the point that Paul made, broadcast remains one of the primary places that people go for sports. So I don't think that older people are only on broadcast.
And I just think it's so important to acknowledge that there's often it's just a stereotype that older people, can't use QR codes. They can't do this. It's not that they can't. It's often that no one's either giving the opportunity or just showing how. A lot of research shows it's actually, a lot of these are great opportunities to connect with consumers. It's just we have to, again, give the opportunity and show these new ways to do it. you don't want to start with a VR headset, of course, but just consider new ways to engage audiences differently. So I think it's important to acknowledge that we aren't stereotyping as well with certain demographics, and that includes younger ones as well.
Well,
And on that,
oh, go ahead, Katie. Well,
I
I
was
was
just
I was gonna actually tie you into this because I actually, we're talking a lot, I think, here about number of people, right? So in terms of audience metrics, but Katie, you brought up, I think, a really interesting point about sort of the attention span or how long someone engages in that. So where are we in terms of understanding, this is actually part of the question too. How might differences in measured or expected audience attention across marketing venues and formats impact marketing trends? Because I think it's not just the number of people, perhaps, but it's also important as to, sort of their attention. And then I think also on the flip side, which is part of B, is your ability to measure that. How long they're engaging. So I'm sorry if I derailed your response.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I mean, we've shown over time, and obviously I'm not the one doing the research, I'm just reading the data points. The attention span, the American attention span is continuing to decline. And with that, then you're seeing that advantageously, right, with the increase of social media. And but what I was going to pull back was, in addition to that short attention span and the measuring and the traceabilities and being able to appropriately target in that storyline, theoretically, and we haven't figured out how to do it yet, but theoretically, just to what I had mentioned in our conversations last week, it would be great to build that story and you see an ad and you can go further down into that story and get people interested in it with a QR code, with something, maybe if you have a little bit of an ad that then goes on to longer, your short ad is more of a reminder ad, and a reminder ad just shows your brand name and your generic name and isn't making other product claims about that. And then you can click into a QR code or something that will take you into a longer story. But I think that bringing it into a story where you can actually make it relatable, but also, you're not dancing around and, doing something, running a marathon if you have COPD. We're not looking for any of that stuff, but bringing a story so you're relatable to the average patient population that might have the disease and might benefit from the product, and make it more engaging so that they can relate to it and understand it more, I think gives you some, in a broadcast space, gives you more of the balance and more of the aspects that that a lot of people use influencers for, right? Because those are people who get it and they understand it. But I think if we can find a way to build a longer story and get people kind of where they are on their acceptance pattern, that we can get more of that safety in there. We can get more of a true understanding of what's going on. And I think that's important because so much of the data shows that when a patient comes in to talk to a physician, the majority of their information, 70% plus of their information, is coming from these TV ads. And so how can we adjust these TV ads so that they can be getting more of the bigger picture of the data that they need to know?
Okay. All right. Yeah. I think that's very interesting. And I do want to kind of get back to, you've mentioned balance quite a bit here. And I think that is an important aspect, right? So, and I think it was Janelle that you mentioned sort of that people are getting tired of that, that list of long side effects that you have sort of at the end of a sort of a traditional television advertisement, for example. So, so what are you I mean, I know that you're kind of struggling, it sounds like right now, with how do you get that balance in these new formats. So what do you see in the next year or two that would potentially be needed, or that you see coming downstream that will help inform that to determine how to address it?
Well, from my side, what we see is whatever the storyboard comes from the creatives, right? And the marketing people come to us. And then we spend our time, kind of in essence, as the gatekeeping function, looking to figure out how we can meet the requirements. And so unless there's a different way, that there's an advertising requirements that come down from OPDP that allows that shorter format, I don't know how much shorter our format can be in the pharmaceutical space, because we're going to constantly look at the different guidances and the regulations that have been put forth and try to make sure that we're meeting as many of those as possible. Now, there are people, especially the pharmaceutical companies that are members of PhRMA, the Pharmaceutical Association of America, are going to submit for comments and down to the FDA in order to get some additional guidance, but not everybody will do that. Another kind of thing that I always try to keep in mind, and especially like when I'm teaching, is the fact of which drugs actually are using broadcast ad, and the data shows that the people who are most likely to use a DTC ad are those that actually use of the product does not provide an additional added benefit as much as the ones who provide the larger added benefit when you use the medications are not necessarily the ones that are going to be using the drug advertisements. So I think it's a very complicated on multiple levels. How do you target the right audience? How do you get the information? Who is it doing? All the above.
Janelle, were you going to add something to that? I think I saw you come off mute earlier.
Someone actually just brought it up that the FDA actually updated with the final rule in the latter half of 2023, which and I appreciate this comment very much. They're referencing that they said that the FDA makes it harder with the new stricter dual modality of pacing requirements. They're referencing the major statement. What I would say is that from the research side, what I'm seeing with consumers is that they're actually wanting these types of things. What's happening is you've got great, happy visual portrayal on these TV ads, enter in the risk information, major statement. It's incredibly jarring for them. And what it's doing is really interrupting that narrative flow and effectively erasing any of that positive experience that they had and any of the benefits that were learned about that medication. And so what I would love to see is the ability, and I guess just any drug manufacturer that would be willing to just do one ad and test a different format. I actually think whichever drug manufacturer does this first is going to be extremely well received from a public relations perspective, from a health communication perspective, and from an educational perspective from the public, because they are wanting something different where they feel like they're just being talked to in an honest way. This is what they're looking for. The comments I'm seeing are, just to summarize, like, we know that this is just being done because of legal requirements. We feel like we're being manipulated and we're tuning out. And so they want something different. And there's ways that we can, test this. And I think academics obviously want to help, and we have pharmacists who want to help, and ways that we can really do this effectively. What I love about TV is you already have a captive audience. You already have someone watching a show or a story that they're engrossed in and excited about. Whereas I think about myself scrolling on social media at night, I'm not a captive audience. It's incredibly difficult to get someone's attention on social media in a really meaningful way. So I do believe that this is the format that is going to continue to be impactful for audiences and where you can really see some substantive change. And so I think that those changes in 2023 were incredibly helpful on the FDA's part.
I agree that I like that we finally got the CCN is what it's the abbreviation of it, on how you communicate that major statement. When I talk to people that I know, I live in California, I live in Southern California, so I know producers and I know, directors and things. And when they are talking about what they need in order to move things forward, they often are talking about the story that Janelle mentioned and how to integrate it. And they just feel like they're having to to throw in this extra balance information and just kind of drop it. And it's kind of like when you see a brief summary, like if you're in a TV, if you're looking in a magazine and you see the page that's all, everything else is color, and you see the page that's all kind of black and white, and you kind of flip over it. And so that's why I think that figuring out ways to integrate that better, just as Janelle mentioned, would be very helpful in communicating that balancing kind of information. And it's hard to kind of get that information in, but I do believe that the dual modality is a very critical way to do that.
Okay, and I wanted to move on to our third discussion question. How might current and emerging trends in television and prescription drug promotion have bearing, and we kind of touched on this a little bit, bearing on the balance of information presented to consumers and or healthcare practitioners through this venue, and what are the implications for public health? So I think taking this even broader now and looking at and I do think this touches on several things that we talked about leaving no person behind, about making sure that we have, that, and I think of equity too. I mean, you have people with different learning styles, different backgrounds, different education, different interfaces with healthcare professionals, different access to healthcare providers, et cetera. So how do you take all that sort of into account and specifically, with regards to not just broadcast, but where we're moving in the future with these other venues? I don't know if that might be a bigger softball or a bigger ball than a softball for someone. Does anyone want to tackle that one? Nobody. Well, let's sort of break it down a little bit. I mean, have any of you done any look at sort of public health implications? I mean, is there something that is looking at as we make shifts or as there's trends in different prescription drug promotion? Is there anybody looking at implications for public health? Is that an untapped area?
I wouldn't say it's untapped. I know that there was a recent study at Johns Hopkins looking at essentially the most often prescribed drugs are in fact, or I'm sorry, the most often advertised drugs are not, how do I say this? I don't want to say that, I don't want to misrepresent this. Not the most needed, let's say. And so they were incredibly expensive, heavily tailored for rare diseases. And so we're seeing, and that goes with advertising culture, of course, but in terms of that public health, education versus promotion debate that we see with pharmaceutical advertising, it definitely leans into that category of promotion, right? Taking center stage. However, I will say that for that study, it was only looking at ads from Canada. So that kind of goes without saying. But I think that we are starting to look at this for public health. The thing I would say though, and this kind of blends into this whole conversation, is that the availability of a lot of this data for researchers is incredibly difficult. A lot of this is proprietary information. And I totally understand and respect that, but it's very, very difficult for us to get a clear picture in terms of the spend and where the spend is going, even if we're just talking about digital versus TV. That's really, really challenging for us to be able to make an accurate assumption, and that we shouldn't be making assumptions, right? It should be factually based. So that's really tricky for us. And I think it's important. We need to be looking more at these public health issues. And I know JAMA is often looking at that. But it's more physicians who are tackling these issues and less researchers in advertising or marketing. And we have a lot of knowledge, I think, to give on ROI, KPI, things like that. So I would like to see more of that happening, but the access to a lot of this data is really challenging.
There's the stuff that I'm aware of is older, where it's talking about, a link between drug advertisements, especially TV advertisements, and the increase in the overall drug consumption. and the increase in prescription utilization. I think that, again, I think it's a complicated kind of consideration. You know, there's only 2 countries in the world that are going to allow this direct to consumer marketing. So, and you also have to add that 70 to 90% of the profits from the pharmaceutical companies are going to come from the United States. And so, so you have to add those elements onto the fact of the fact that I mean, direct to consumer advertising, the last kind of numbers that I saw for it as far as ROIs was back around 2000 and about 10 years ago. And the ROI was tremendous. You know, $1 spent, you get $4.26 back as far as profits. But when we're doing that and when we're looking financially, it can be, we're meeting the endpoints. But there's not a lot of stuff that when I prepare for my lectures and stuff that I've seen on the public health benefit and, you know, what are the number needed to treat in order to get the benefit, and are we really targeting and increasing those aspects. Now, with that said, there is also, you know, if you look back on recognition, and I typically use Lilly for this long ago, there are some wonderful disease state ads that have been out, and I use Lilly's example of bringing to the forefront the recognition of depression and the recognition of mental health issues that back in the, you know, the 90s and stuff, when that came out, that wasn't an area therapeutically or medically that was getting the attention that it does now. And, you know, part of the reason that it has more of the attention that it does now is because of what the research was and what the advertising was that was done by the pharmaceutical companies. And so I think that there have been public health advances based on that, but I'm not aware of specific literature, you know, specific studies looking at that specifically.
Okay. And then I have sort of two questions kind of related to healthcare practitioners. I think sort of the first is, you know, obviously, it's not a secret that, you know, consumers watch these ads, they get some information, then they go to their healthcare provider and they sort of say, you know, hey, you know, you know, drug X is going to solve my problems, and then the healthcare provider needs to be aware of what they have been watched so that they're able to adequately address it and then actually put it in context for the patient. But also the healthcare providers are also consumers, right? So they're watching these ads as well. And I guess, you know, in terms of thinking about that balance of information across venues, is there a difference in how you think of it as being more or less targeted to consumers or healthcare practitioners across different types of broadcast or streaming venues?
When we look at ads coming through, we're considering that they're all being consumers, and in essence targeting the requirements of the lowest common denominator of what that would be. You know, the average drug ad is going to be about somewhere in the high school grade level reading area. But what is coming across based on how their targeting is, and when we've asked marketers of who's going to likely get this, it's not specifically targeted to the healthcare provider. And the amount of data and the type of data that's delivered there has been different. The FDA has a great guidance that they put out last year. They put out multiple last year. We were saying that they were very busy. And it provides information on how you should present information, quantitative kind of information, and that is very helpful. But when we look at it from our side, there's a difference in if it's going to learned intermediary or healthcare provider versus if it's not specifically just for that, then we consider it all consumer.
Great. So there were a lot of questions that came in from the audience about social media and such, and I've kind of kept away from those just because I think that's a whole different session. However, there is one that I wanted to kind of get all of your thoughts on, and this was, do we have a sense of how many minutes are spent by consumers and healthcare practitioners on streaming TV compared to minutes spent on social media? And how is that impacting prescription drug promotion practices? And I realize there may be an age component, there may be a lot of other things. So maybe if you could speak sort of broadly to those categories and those trends.
That's a great question. I know that when we look at advertising in a social media space, it's going to be different than when we're looking at a broadcast, just based on what you can click to and what you can show. And so you can have the kind of the context around it. And again, it's still going to vary in the different forms of social media based on what their target or typical user is, will help us determine on if a drug is appropriate to advertise in that space as well. But I'm not sure about the actual data points.
Janelle or Marianne, do you have any insights there?
I think I saw that question and was overwhelmed by it, because you're doing a couple of things and then you have to break out the audience in all those different ways. And I think that goes to one of the issues that I brought up before, and that's just in general, the difficulty in measuring audiences across platforms, and especially as a consumer, as the audience migrates from one platform to another. So I don't know if Janelle has any more information on that, or
Doing a quick literature search here. So looks like if we're just saying average, which I don't love that because it's taking all demographics into account, but I'm just doing a rough estimate here. And again, apples and oranges. I don't love being put on the spot with this, but so I'm just gonna say generally from Nielsen, if we're comparing all like broadcast, streaming, cable media, 40% of our time is spent on streaming content. I'm just giving you a rough estimate. I can't give a number of hours, but that's pretty substantial versus 20% of our time on broadcast, 27% on cable. So I think Marianne kind of covered that. I can't, again, give a rough estimate of hours, but roughly 3 to 4 hours every day is spent on social media. But the way that we break that data down then is attention span. And so the attention span on TV or streaming is much longer, again, speaking to that narrative. So we just lay there on social media all day, right? But we're just scrolling and not really stopping to spend time on reels, et cetera. We kind of go through that. Whereas that broadcast streaming is able to captivate our attention, if that makes sense. So this is where it gets a bit tricky with talking about the nuance, I suppose. But I hope that's helpful.
yeah, the other thing is, as I'm trying to think this through, is that and what we haven't touched on is the multi-screen use. So I'm watching television, but I'm on my phone. Maybe I'm on my phone because I'm seeing what's going on social media particularly if I'm watching a program live, or even if I'm streaming, but I'm having a watch party with my friends. I might be on social media, see what's going on in social media. I might be texting my friends to get their thoughts on it, and I might be watching it. The other thing is that it goes to attention, is that a lot of times, particularly how people use streaming, particularly during the pandemic, what we watched and how we watched changed a little bit. We were watching things that were much more familiar to us because it was comforting. And a lot of times people will have a streaming service on in the background just to lull them to sleep. So again, the issue of how we're measuring social media use, how we're measuring viewing, what viewing means, it's very, very complex. So again, I saw that question, and that's a really, really tough one. But it's tough, but but I think that's what we're all, those of us who, do research in this area, that's what we're trying to untangle, and that's what we're trying to figure out.
Yeah,
I don't know if
terrific.
that was helpful or not, but
Well, yes, I think so. And we're at kind of the end of our time too. So I think that's probably a good way to sort of end things there. And I wanted to thank all of you so much for your time and your expertise this afternoon. Sharing your thoughts and insights has been tremendously helpful. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
I'd like to welcome everyone back from the break. I introduce myself as well. My name is Victoria Gem, and I'm an assistant research director here at the Duke-Margolis Institute for Health Policy. I have the pleasure of moderating today's second panel on endorsements and disclosures in digital formats. So during this session, panelists will be discussing disclosure practices and prescription drug advertisements on digital formats, with a focus on how consumers' perceptions of disclosures may vary when viewing prescription drug promotional content on short form compared with long form video. I did want to note that we will be considering recommendations related to regulation of promotional communications for prescription drug products, while also exploring areas for future research based on disclosure practices from other market segments. Some examples discussed during this session may include disclosures made by independent parties who are not compensated spokespersons and whose speech does not represent regulated promotional communication. So with that, we've got a great group of panelists with us today. But before I bring everyone on screen, I'd like to welcome Rakia Pippins from Arnold & Porter, who will be providing a brief presentation to help us kick off this session. Rakia is an attorney at Arnold & Porter, where she co-leads the Consumer Products Practice Group and the Consumer Products and Retail Industry team. Rakia's practice is focused in the areas of FDA's regulation of food, dietary supplements, cosmetic, drug, and medical device products sold directly to consumers, as well as FTC and state regulation of the marketing and sale of consumer products. So thank you so much for joining us, Rakia. If you'd like to come on screen now, you can go ahead and start your presentation.
Oh, my pleasure, Victoria, and thank you all for giving me this platform today. It's so interesting because the discussion here actually highlights one of the specialties in my practice, and that is acknowledging that often because of the enforcement regime and risk associated with promoting life sciences products, such companies aren't as aware of other guidance on how you can use social media and other mechanisms to promote them. And we're hoping that this small discussion I start today will provide us a framework for a really healthy, lively discussion later in the program. Next slide. So I'm going to describe the endorsement and disclosure digital formats regulatory framework, but I first need to explain why this is so important. And it should be no secret that use of social media and influencer and endorsement marketing is a necessity for any company now trying to educate people about their products because of how often that type of communication is relied upon by the public. I have here some stats that have come from different business environments. Next slide, please. But what's important to note is that those stats are, and the ones I'm showing here are not even focused on in the life sciences industry. It just shows that the budget that is being used by companies to market their products is transferring more to the social media space and use of influencers. And then as a result of consumer reliance on it, it's the focus on how to market the products is in essence switched from traditional print or television marketing to all of these other mechanisms of communicating with the public. Next slide. And pharma has started to transition to this, recognizing that that is the way to ensure people are knowing about their products. And there has been a number of different articles over the next 5 years talking about not only the increase of focus on this area by life sciences, but some of the reasons that companies have been hesitant to enter it before. Next slide. And so what I'm hoping to talk a little bit about are the two regulatory frameworks that have impacted the promotion of these products and in essence can help define some guidance outside of FDA on how influencers can effectively educate consumers about products without necessarily triggering deceptive or confusing communications. Just as a primer for those of you who haven't worked in this space, generally there are two agencies that share jurisdiction over over-the-counter drugs, medical devices, and dietary supplements. I'll talk about prescription in a second. And that is FDA and the FTC. I highlight this because their joint jurisdiction has enabled the FTC to create a lot of guidance in this space that is applicable really from a business perspective to all companies in learning how to navigate engagement and promotional practices. The agencies operate under a memorandum of understanding. This is separate from the statutes that give them authority. And there are other bodies like the National Advertising Division of the Better Business Bureau that also provide a lot of guidance to companies on how they can effectively use influencers and endorsers, and also guidance to endorsers and influencers on how they can communicate with products without violating the law. One thing I want to note is that the FTC Act explicitly excludes the FTC's jurisdiction over the safety and efficacy of prescription drug products and other things that FDA has gone through its process of determining the appropriate of selling those products for their intended use. And as a result, there's often this misimpression that the FTC has no jurisdiction over prescription drug advertising. They do not take that position, and the statute doesn't say that actually. It just means that they don't have jurisdiction over, for example, the indication or certain safety statements, et cetera, that the FDA has evaluated. But some of these other engagement behaviors and, so for example, disclosure of material connections and other things would definitely fall under the FTC's purview. Next slide. There have been examples of the FDA and the FTC trying to come together with respect to social media and influencers. I have here one example that involved sale of flavored e-liquids. In doing that, I want to highlight two differences in the agency's purposes that often affect the angles that they take when dealing with enforcement. The FDA is a public safety agency, meaning that its resources are prioritized towards things that actually are impacting the public health, whereas the FTC's charge is towards consumer protection. So there can be issues that they pursue that don't necessarily involve whether it harms someone from a physical sense. They can be dealing more with the harm of being deceived or from a monetary harm of buying a product they would not otherwise. Next slide. Now, while I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about guidance from the FTC, I want to note that FDA has also been showing that they care about what's happening on social media and the use of influencers. We all paid attention to the first Kardashian letter. It's almost like you haven't done anything if a Kardashian is not supporting your product. And that was back in 2015. What I always want to highlight is that the Duke-Margolis letter was really focused on her failure to highlight the fact that, or achieve what we refer to as fair balance and the law firms like mine that advise in the space, that she was talking about its efficacy, but also not communicating the risk information that's required in those types of advertisements. Next slide. And more recently, there was a second warning letter to a different Kardashian, Khloe, that similarly highlighted these issues. Now, while this wasn't in social media, it emphasized the FDA's focus on use of influencers and endorsers. And here, one of the things that they highlighted was that they felt the way that Khloe was talking about the product, the migraine product, actually created a misleading impression by talking about the overall benefit while not discussing the risk or maybe minimizing the risk. Again, focus more on fair balance. Next slide. But what's been really interesting in a recent enforcement letter that was sent by the agency, I'm sorry, it's a little misformatted, so I will send an updated version later here. I apologize for that. Is in this ad that involves Serena, it switched from a focus on fair balance to the stronger statement that the belief that using a celebrity athlete actually amplified the misleading representations. And I think it showed a shift in the position on even using endorsers in a way. And here stating that the use of this celebrity athlete and tests that you can't see here actually led to more credibility. She's viewed as a credible source. And I think that's something to keep in mind for endorsers or people in this space too, because there was a time where credibility for a health product may have been more limited to using a doctor or healthcare practitioner, but to see that used in the sense of an athlete talking about a product, I think it's really interesting and showing FDA's thoughts about this or the direction they're going from an enforcement standpoint. Next slide. As others on who are attending this meeting can discuss more, FDA is clearly focused on endorsers, and they have a lot of research, some that is finalized, but they're preparing to publish their results on, others that are still going, whether dealing with endorser status and the explicitness of payment and direct-to-consumer promotion, or dealing with how endorser status affects actual use in television ads. But what I want to highlight is that while a lot of this work is in progress, it doesn't mean that there isn't a regulatory framework or some guidance on how existing endorsers can talk about products in communications, and whether in social media or in broadcast media. Next slide. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that now. Can we go back one? I'm sorry, I've apologized. Oh, I'm sorry, yes, next slide. Sorry about that. I have control issues. I'm learning to relinquish control and switching slides. The FTC has been focused on endorsements and also testimonies or reviews for years. And I have here just some headlines that highlight different updates that they have done, whether it is affecting rulemakings, creating regulations, or even putting companies on notice about the way that they're using endorsers. And it all is tied to a fundamental principle that the FTC has used for years when they say that they hate what are referred to as deceptive door knockers. It's the reason why when you get a letter in the mail, it has to say that it's an advertisement on the outside of the envelope before you open it. They don't want people wasting their time engaging content without knowing before they engage it if it's an authentic statement versus someone who's trying to sell them something or promote them or have been induced to speak in a particular way. And as through this different development at the FTC, they have not only had warnings and enforcement, but also put out guidance on how to effectively engage as an influencer in the marketplace. Next slide, please. Some of this guidance is earlier on. So as I mentioned about deceptive door knocking, back in 2015, the FTC issued a enforcement policy on deceptively formatted advertisements, which definitely put out guidance about, in the context of having websites and other types of ads, making clear that when it is something that is owned by a company or sponsored content versus something that someone would think was otherwise independent or unique. It was where they got into concerns about what's referred to as native advertising. Next slide. From there, they really started talking about how endorsers were infiltrating the health space in a way that made it clear to make sure that some guidelines were put in place. And there are three particular documents in particular that can be on the radar for those. It was the December 2022 Health Products Compliance Guidance, which had a number of examples that involved use of endorsers for health products. They had a notice of penalty offenses that was sent to over 700 companies, including several life sciences companies in 2022. That was about the unlawful use of endorsements, and testimonials. And I have the Consumer Review Fairness Act here just as an indication of statutes that were provided to help also maintain the authenticity of reviews and content online. Next slide. What I'm going to quickly talk about before we open up the discussion, though, are some tips that can come for those who are engaged in this space, as we also discuss where there might be opportunities to improve guidance on use of influencers. The most recent changes to the endorsement guides, which were actually finalized in 2023, I believe, had a very detailed discussion on how to adequately disclose material connections. And a theme you'll consistently see is they feel that disclosures need to be in the same medium that you're communicating. So if it's both a visual and audible material, that your disclosure should be both visual and audible. They talk a lot about expert endorsers, and that if you're an influencer that is considered an expert in an area like a healthcare practitioner, that you need to have actually used the level of expertise in reviewing the product that people would expect if you're going to talk about it. And they have a lot of discussion about how you ensure that the endorsements are actually accurate, whether it is ensuring that you've actually used the bona fide use, that you're not exaggerating your experience with it, just really tailoring what is said to what a company can actually say if you have a connection to them. Next slide. I love some of the examples that they've given, and I just want to note, they talk about disclosing financial support with clinical trials. I really love their example from the FPC on the expert endorsement, because I think more often than not, there may be healthcare practitioners who are not aware of the FTC's position, that they might want you to also have reviewed the underlying studies or other things before you're stating how efficacious a product is, because they fear that consumers would expect that. And the deceptive testimonial of just being careful about when you pick an influencer or you're an endorser and you're talking about somebody else's results, are they actually typical, or are they consistent with what your results, what a client would be able to, a company would be able to share about the product? Next slide. So last but not least, I just want to highlight that there are some clear indicators of the importance of thinking about this by influencers that the FTC has made. They have sent warning letters both in 2017 and more recently in 2023 directly to influencer endorsers, letting them know what the expectations are about how they disclose their material connections and tailor their statements to what are actually substantiated claims. I want to also note that in that most updated endorsement guide that I mentioned, there was an added regulation that actually noted that endorsers themselves can be held liable, whereas historically it was only the company that could be held liable. That switch is believed to be needed to help clean up the way that endorsers are engaging in the marketplace. And the FTC has also issued guidance for influencers on what they can do to make sure that they're complying with the law in their eyes and being truthful and non-misleading in disclosures. And so you can look up Disclosures 101 for social media. And if you go to my next slide, which is the last one, it will highlight some really important points on do's and don'ts. It talks about the importance to clearly and conspicuously disclose your material connections, that it has to be in the same medium as the communicated endorsement. It talks about superimposing those disclosures on images and videos, because they often, if you can't rely on the platform's disclosures of sponsor, because they don't often travel when the content is forwarded or shared. It talks about making sure that when you have longer discussions that you're periodically repeating your disclosures and your connections, so that people who only see part of it still get the benefit of knowing that you have a material connection. And certain terms that shouldn't be used, that are considered not clear and conspicuous enough for consumers to really for the public to really understand your relationship or connection to a place. And then lastly, for those who may be speaking to communities that speak different languages, ensuring that there's consistency in the language that the disclosure is and how you're communicating with that group. And again, reiterating that relying on the platform's disclosure tool alone is not enough. So I say that you can stop sharing now. That is a lot. I've tried to give you FTC 101 in 7 minutes or so, or I guess I took more than that, 10. But what I'm hoping is that it's a good foundation for the conversation today, and also an indication that there is guidance that can be learned from other industries and other regulatory bodies that can aid use of influencers for life sciences companies. And so with that, I'll hand it back.
Great. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Rukia, and really for providing foundational information to start our discussion off with. So we'll now move on to the moderated discussion. And at this time, I'd like to invite all our panelists for this session to join us on screen. So joining this panel, I'd like to first welcome Sneha Dev, Executive Director at Generation Patient. Next, we have Dr. Nathaniel Evans, Associate Professor of Advertising in the Department of Advertising and Public Relations at University of Georgia. We also have joining us today, Dr. Adam Goodkoff, emergency medicine physician, healthcare educator, and the CEO of Medfluencers. And then finally, I'd like to welcome Dr. Tong Guo, Associate Professor of Marketing at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business and the Department of Economics. So welcome, thank you all. And we do have a number of discussion questions lined up today. We'll also have those put in the chat for you all to reference. And we'll do our best to get to as many questions as well in the Q&A that's submitted by the audience. But just as a reminder, we do have a number of folks joining today. So we've received a lot of questions already. We'll try to circle back to some of the questions from the first session that are particularly germane to this discussion as well. All right, so with that, I do want to give our additional panelists a moment to provide some brief opening remarks. So first, I'd like to turn to Nathaniel.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Reflecting on these practices, I think it's important to look back at some of the early guidelines that were established in 2015, looking at native advertising. Two important questions were asked here. One, do consumers know that they're actually seeing paid for advertising content? And two, if they don't, how can we help them? And I think the same two questions really apply here. So for me, I think it's important to establish a baseline measure of recognition of content. I think that there's a reason why advertisers and marketers are very interested in these types of practices. They garner a lot of attention, but I think it's important to establish why. Is it under false pretenses? Is it because people are really engaging with the content? Or is it because there's an inherent misunderstanding of what the content actually is? And so establishing that base level of understanding the material connection is very important. And two, asking and learning from previous disclosure practices, how can we apply these tools in this particular context? So for example, do the disclosures need to be on screen? Do they need to be spoken by the individual influencers themselves, right? So self-disclosure, or is something in the caption going to provide enough material for normal consumers to understand what they're seeing? So these are really important questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Nathaniel, for those remarks. I'd like to turn next to Tom. If you'd like to go ahead. Oh, and you're on mute.
Okay, so hi everyone. It's Tong here from marketing professor at Duke-Fuqua. I would like to comment a little bit about what we learned from past regulatory experience on the impact of mandated disclosure, particularly a disclosure for any endorsement relationships on medical expert and pharmaceutical firms. So we examined the impact of Sunshine Law, which was initially adopted by a few pioneering states before it rolled out to the whole nationwide by 2013. Many of such regulatory requirement was motivated by the fact that regulators would really want to ensure patients can make informed decisions. And they have enough information to compare and contrast between different healthcare professionals. So that particular law required full disclosure of any financial and promotional activities, relationships between pharmaceutical and medical device companies and healthcare professionals. So we looked into how that mandated universal disclosure could impact physicians' prescription behavior, as well as the future marketing activities considered by these firms. What we found is that the disclosure did reduce the prescribing behavior of those companies' medications, particularly in those most heavily promoted drug classes, such as statins, antidepressants, or antipsychotics. When it comes to the firm's decisions, future promotional activities directed at these medical experts, the results seems quite mixed. On average, we didn't find any significant change in their promotional strategies after these mandated disclosure. So that suggests that if there were any assumed pressure coming from the public, patients or insurance payers, that's probably wasn't strong enough to alter these promotional relationships or endorsement relationships. Second, we also didn't find any evidence supporting the hypothesis that physicians would negotiate for better payment based on the disclosure, which contrasts with what's been seen in the CEO compensation disclosure literature. And finally, perhaps the most interestingly, it seems that many of these pharmaceutical companies are using the disclosed data to their advantage. they can tailor their promotional strategies based on what their competitors are doing, particularly by focusing more intensely on physicians who are prescribing very heavily some of their most expensive drugs. So it turns out that these companies are differentiating from competitors and reinforcing their endorsement relationships with key healthcare professionals rather than broadening their promotional efforts. So in summary, what we found from past regulatory practice was that while the universal disclosure might be addressing some of these conflict of interest or information asymmetry concerning this market to some extent, it isn't a comprehensive solution. It has a modest effect on healthcare professionals' prescription behavior, very limited influence on patient choices, very likely due to a lack of a guidance on how to use the disclosed information, and actually provides competitive advantage to pharmaceutical companies who can leverage to their benefit.
Great. Thanks so much, Tong. I'd like to turn next to Sneha.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sneha. I am the executive director at Generation Patient. We're a nonprofit representing young adults with all different chronic and rare conditions. And we are young adult patient-led. So I've been a patient since I was 6 years old, and so have been on prescription drugs since that age. And I'm coming to this work because one of our areas of focus at Generation Patient as it pertains to policy is increasing oversight of pharmaceutical ads on social media. I think at Generation Patient and through our own experiences as young adult patients, we see the potential for harm when influencers and healthcare providers are advertising prescription drugs. I just want to ground this conversation and just reminding us that prescription drugs are not the same things as lotion, as makeup that's being advertised, as pumpkin spice lattes. They're, can be very serious chemical compounds, and they have the potential for harm and so need to be treated as such. I also think upon reflection from the last panel, one thing that really struck me was the emergence of conversations about age, which I think is crucial, especially as we're thinking about social media. We know that nearly 90% of teens and young adults who use social media say that they use it to find their information about their healthcare. So we know that there are different demographic distinctions about who's using social media and how we're using it. We also know with the influx of influencers, particularly micro-influencers, that there's a heightened parasocial relationship and what that can mean when it's not just an advertisement, but particularly through comment sections, direct messages, these unique features of social media that can be used in a way to influence patients and followers, and so need more guidance and regulation as well. The last thing I will say is that recently we helped our community of young adult patients help drive the Protecting Patients from Deceptive Drug Ads Online Act, which is brought to light by Senators Durbin and Braun. And I know a lot of the discussions today will hopefully will not be centered around the legislation, but there are some things like increased collaboration between the FTC and FDA on this issue that are touched upon by this legislation too. So I just wanted to flag that.
Great, thanks so much, Sneha. And last but not least, Adam, if you'd like to join on for some remarks.
Yeah, thank you everyone for having me and joining today. I'm really honored to be among this group. And I think from my perspective and background as a healthcare educator, a clinician, and someone who is attempting to navigate this space from a compliance first approach and understanding the regulatory guidances that are set forward. I think from the lens of a healthcare provider and touching on much of what's been said today already, there is an opportunity for credible information to be provided from a lens of combating misinformation, from ensuring that there is a credible provision of information commensurate with the level of training and the appropriate balance of information that's provided in those settings. So I think we have an opportunity to reach HCPs and patients in settings where they're organically, we heard in the last panel, spending more and more time. And I think this is a really great time to get together and discuss the right way to approach that process together. So very much looking forward to the discussion.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone, for those remarks. So I'd love to dive into the first question that we have for discussion today, which is how are current practices for endorsement disclosures or also disclosures of authenticity for health-related products impacting consumer and healthcare provider perceptions of promotional messaging and health-related behavior? So that's a big question, but wanted to see if anyone would like to jump in first.
So I'll reiterate, basically summarize what I shared just now in terms of what our research team found. So as I mentioned in a quick nutshell, the impact of a mandated universal disclosure of potential financial ties and endorsement relationships between these pharmaceutical and medical device companies and healthcare professionals would have some effect and did show with some reducing effect on their prescription behavior, particularly for those heavily promoted branded medications. However, in terms of the impact on patients' choices, it's a question mark. And we think it's at least because of two major reasons. One, even though with disclosed information, patients are not provided with enough tools to digest and interpret these information so that they could effectively connect the information to their decision making. And two, when we think about patients and the way they receive healthcare service as well as prescription medications, it's heavily there's an important gatekeeper here, which is insurance company. So whoever is part of their insurance network would be the main source that these patients would look into as the first step. So even with disclosed information, which I guess implies potential price comparison for a patient, due to a limited choice set made available by in-network providers, patients really do not have that much flexibility to make full use of these disclosed information. So that's why these are the main two of the many reasons why we think, and we do observe empirical evidence that the impact of disclosure has very limited effect on patient decisions.
Great. Thank you so much, Tong. Nathaniel, I wasn't sure if you'd be able to jump in and share a little bit more about trust and transparency in relation to some of your work.
Yeah, so several years back, we developed a scale that taps into this concept of a consumer's perception of the extent to which an advertiser or an entity makes the paid nature and the sponsor clear. So we call it sponsorship transparency. And there's been for some time this really established framework in the advertising literature that when consumers recognize that something's an ad, bad things happen, right? There's typically negative downstream consequences on key performance indicators, attitudes, behaviors, and so naturally advertisers are hoping that their viewers don't recognize the content as advertising. However, if and when they do, there's this kind of boomerang effect that consumers are even more upset. And so what we've done in the context of a lot of our disclosure research is establishing the best way we can get somebody to recognize content as an advertising and as an ad, and two, if they recognize it early and quickly, we find that heightens levels of sponsorship transparency, which in turn mitigates or reduces some of those downstream consequences that advertisers care about. So in short, both sides win. You get a more informed public, and you get an advertiser that gets those key performance indicators met. And so there's a number of ways you can do this, most notably having a disclosure that's early and often and noticeable. However, just having it on the screen in big letters isn't a guarantee that somebody's going to see it, right? And so there needs to be an impetus to establish whether or not consumers actually pay visual attention to these disclosures. So that's a need in this particular realm, research-wise, that needs to be done. Two, right, there is some research to suggest that individual self-disclosure, right, an influencer verbally stating that they've been paid actually translates into increased trust, right? And this is through a number of mechanisms: parasocial relationship, perceived similarity, and even sponsorship transparency. So focusing on that as a potential avenue to help consumers and also help advertisers is a potential avenue for research.
Great. Thanks so much, Nathaniel. Rukia, I saw that you were looking to jump in earlier. Wasn't sure if you still wanted to
It's
share
an
some thoughts now.
interesting concept. I mean, I think sometimes I can say, I don't want to speak for industry, but I will say that the companies that I work with want to be responsible. It's a question of whether what the government prescribes is actually necessary, effective for achieving that goal. So like when I listened to what Nathaniel said, I think there's this presumption that if you disclose that this person is paid, it should make them not want the product or not trust. But I don't think that's actually how people work. So you find yourself using these tools to protect yourself from government regulation. But what it leads to, in some cases, is consumers being over inundated with warnings, right? So if they see sponsor and ad everywhere, or you take an example of, for those who live in California and deal with Prop 65, that's like the cancer warning that's everywhere. Does it lead to them not reading it at all, right? And there's a tension between knowing what's effective, but also wanting to provide guidance so that people don't choose not to do anything. And I don't know that any of us have the answer, but I just want to acknowledge that a lot of companies are doing what they're like, hey, we got to do this because we've been told. But I take what the social science is saying, and even the FDA's research on this, it doesn't cause them to distrust it in the way that I think the hope would be when the rules are created. So I'll pass it back. I'm sorry.
Yeah, could I jump in? I think you make a good point. However, that wear out or that blindness doesn't come out of nowhere, right? It has to emerge from somewhere. So think about like paid search advertising. Everyone knows that the first 3, 4, 5 are all paid for, but that took time, right? And so to suggest that people might be upset or I don't know, have blindness from warnings or disclosures is presumptive, right? We have to get them there first. So I don't know if that's a barrier to doing that. It shouldn't be. I think we need to establish what's going to work first and foremost before we start talking about how consumers might be worn out, right? If that makes sense.
I'll be quiet. I will say this. I think my point is more, if you get too prescriptive, it doesn't allow for nuance and effectiveness. So the direction we've gone now, which the same thing you guys are recommending, is what the FTC has implemented into their regulation, their rules, and their guidance, that if you're speaking, it needs to be audible. If it's visual, it needs to be visual. It has to be in both mediums, that you have to repeat it throughout. It has to be above the fold. If you're on a YouTube page, it can't be something you have to click more. Like, they've been very prescriptive in a lot of that. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just acknowledging that even in doing those things, there's still some blindness occurring. And so we have to acknowledge that, is all my point is.
Yeah, I hear you, and I would tend to agree. And also, there's the issue with stepping on creativity and First Amendment issues, which is also a big no-no, right? You don't want to dictate to influencers what their creative output's going to look like, of course, right? In terms of having to make goods in the content, and naturally, it's going to vary across platforms, right? So being overly prescriptive, well, it can be good, can backfire depending on cross-platform executions.
Yeah, thanks. I think that this some of this conversation, I think, came out in the first session as well, but there's certainly a balance here in making sure that you are providing adequate information to consumers without doing so in a manner that ends up sort of creating the inverse problem of they're tuning out the sort of most critical messaging. So Sneha, I know that you've thought a lot about this and sort of the anecdotal and the direct patient experience sort of side of the conversation. So I'd love to hear some thoughts here.
Yeah, well, first of all, just to go back to what Professor Tong was talking about too, I think one of the unique challenges now is that, I mean, maybe it's a great thing too, but it certainly has the potential for overprescription, is that a lot of telehealth companies don't require insurance anymore. And so it's easier and easier to get access to a lot of prescription medications, particularly for conditions like depression and anxiety, which again has its benefits, but also has its harms, particularly for younger folks who may not always understand the full story of prescription medication. So I think to this point, I have a couple of thoughts based on what everybody was saying. I think one of the things that we think a lot about is who is actually an independent third party. So there's a lot of physicians that we look at and we look to that have financial ties to industry in ways that may not always be related to the direct promotion of the prescription medicine. So I think an example is physicians being flown to Paris by a big pharmaceutical company and then talking about a prescription medication. Does that constitute promotion? Is that something where we need to make it more clear to followers and patients that there is a financial relationship or other sort of benefit that this particular physician is getting? I think that is something that would be really, really important to clarify. Again, who is an independent third party? Same with patients. We see that with patient advocates all the time, getting flown somewhere and, maybe not always disclosing about that financial tie when talking about a particular prescription medication. The second thing I would say is this idea of influencers. Oftentimes we think of as people, but organizations are also very much influencers. I'm not sure legally how it's defined per se, but we know a lot of large patient advocacy groups, which carry significant amounts of trust, usually within patient communities, also accept millions from industry. And we'll talk about prescription medications, which is their job to inform the public and to inform their community about what's really out there. That being said, when there is no disclosure about that financial relationship, and when patient stories are posted side by side on Instagram about how great this drug is, there must be some sort of disclosure, because that is a big trust issue. Is, when I go on the back end and find out that this particular organization has received millions and is talking about this drug in a way that only posits its efficacy, it's very concerning. The last thing I'll just say is that when we think about the targeting to patients, and I think this goes into the importance of social media companies being able to work with the FDA more explicitly, which the legislation that we proposed also includes, but the algorithms, how are patients being targeted once they interact with one ad, particularly with micro-influencers? There's somebody in our community who was interacting with a migraine medication ad and has now been bombarded with ads for that. And I think even going beyond the regulatory level and the compliance, whatever that is, that is taking advantage of a vulnerability of patients who have symptoms, who have things that they're searching for. And to be constantly bombarded by things that are trying to fix that or cure that is really scary and frankly very sad. So I think when we think about, once you interact with one ad and how that creates a lack of trust and being able to have a safe online space for patients, that's really important to us as well.
Great. Thank you so much for those comments, Neha. Before sort of turning to anyone else, wanted to give Adam a chance to jump into the conversation and share a little bit about sort of the healthcare provider perspective, very much engaging in social media, creating content, and sort of viewing it yourself. Interested to hear some thoughts you have here.
Yeah, I'll try to keep the comments focused because I think they can span into some of the other areas of the discussion. But it's interesting, we work with a lot of healthcare content creators, and the perception across the board is very different from various HCPs as to how they like to engage. There are some who we do small focus groups that feel they want more engagement with pharmaceutical companies. They don't like seeing them in their office per se or in the traditional venue settings, and they embrace kind of this digital setting. So I think there are those on one end of the spectrum that feel that way. There are others that I think echo some of the messaging here of maybe less interest in having that invading their so-called personal space of social media away from their clinical time. I think what we can all agree on is that the disclosure is incredibly important, and that strings through, and it is something that we believe strongly in. And I think from my experience in this space, at least, is pretty well done from most folks. Obviously, the FDA does a fantastic job staying on top of this in partnership with the FTC, and I think physicians and the agencies in this space who do this type of work recognize the importance of disclosure. I think the open source payment tool, being able to look up physicians, very easily understand where compensation is from. I think that has in a way shed light through sunshine onto what these relationships are. So I think those are positive steps. To answer Tori to the question of the content creation, I think I can share to at least the collective narrative of the HCPs that we work with. I would say 98% are there because they're passionate about education. Who they want to educate varies again. There are those that are very passionate about patient education. There are those that are passionate about HCP education, and there's a mix there, even among trainees at various levels. And so it really gets quite segmented out. But a common thread, much less than I think the vain appearance of what an influencer, if you will, or we prefer to think of digital opinion leader as kind of the terminology. It's far less what you would think as followers and fame, and much more a desire to provide information. Again, I think a lot of the HCPs, at least that we work with, had really seen success during COVID, during a time where people were spending more time searching for information online, and there was a ton of misinformation. I've been fortunate to be invited to the White House Roundtable for healthcare clinical social media leaders. I've participated with large organizations like Google Health in developing their partner badge around a verified healthcare professional. So I think there are steps in the right directions around disclosure of credible information. And I think we're making progress in that direction, or in setting standards around what the clarity of disclosures can be. But I think the one kind of take home that from my discussions with HCPs is that there is a common thread of education and desire to reach or help empower patients, or if on the HCP side, kind of provide updates to things that maybe a community oncologist, for example, might not get to see for a year or two of meetings.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Adam, for those comments. And I know digital opinion leaders came up in our conversation last year as well in the healthcare provider section, and sort of their role in education and sharing out info, and how that how that interplays with the promotional content that healthcare providers are seeing in these platforms as well. Ricky, I know that you had jumped in, wanted to see if you wanted to still jump in as well.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. Sneha, first of all, I just find you incredibly impressive on all levels, but you raised some things that flag for me the disconnect that exists often with prescription drug companies and industry on the learnings that can happen from the FTC, because everything that you stated is true, right? But the reality is there also is a statute that could help a particular regulatory agency in addressing some of those issues. So when you travel, if you're flown as a doctor to come do a speaker program or something else, and then you later promote that product, that company's product, per the FTC, that's a material connection. You have to disclose it. It's the same way for if you're getting flown out to promote Campbell's soup. Those are, they understand that there are ways outside of money that you can feel, you can be compensated, whether it even the potential of fame can be in that. Their endorsement guides are very detailed on examples, and they absolutely include the example that you just shared. Similarly, it's very clear that endorsers are more than just individuals. It absolutely covers organizations and goes out of its way of talking about the importance of being clear when an organization is not independent of industry. Even if it's like your spouse, it's like that matters, familial connections, who is funding you, all of those things. It's covered, but it's often not known in life sciences because they're considered so separate, but there is things we can learn from that. And the last, I will say the targeting is also an issue the FTC does with behavioral advertising, analytics, privacy via permission. They're on it too. I think the disconnect is who's supposed to monitor some of the stuff that's going on in the life sciences space, and a gap that exists between what is perceived by some lawyers as a gap between the FDA's authority to regulate the owners of a drug and what they say about it and what their agents say about it, versus their ability to regulate what third parties who aren't related to the owner can say about it, because there's not necessarily that same FDA regulatory authority to force that third party to talk about fair risk and balance, even though they can profit from it being sold. But the FTC absolutely has the ability, in my opinion, would have the ability to look into that in some way. And it brings me to one part of their authority, of course, is dealing with false and deceptive practices. The second is dealing with what's referred to as unfairness, which means that there can be an instance where something is actually true, but the injury is so significant that it outweighs the benefit of doing it, that therefore it's still somewhat violative of the law. It's a principle that's why products that are marketed with keep out of reach of children are not marketed directly to children. You have to talk to the parent about it, because it just would be, a kid can't decide whether or not they should use this drug versus the other. A parent should be doing that. And for some of the things that you're talking about, vulnerable populations who would be really susceptible to predatory behaviors, which I don't believe responsible companies are doing. I think there are outliers who do this. There's a structure, there's a framework outside of FDA's authority to help deal with some of those issues. So I just wanted to make sure, Victoria, I introduced that to the conversation.
Yeah, thanks. That's really wonderful. I know leads us into our second question. Before we
Mhm.
pivot, I do know Nathaniel unfortunately has to leave us a touch early. So I wanted to see if you had any additional thoughts that you wanted to share at this time.
I think generally speaking, this is a concerning area for me, and I say that without bias. I truly believe that there is a fair number of providers and pharmaceutical companies that want to help consumers, right? And they want to improve their health. However, there's a lack of understanding about how individuals process this information and how best to help them. And many of these companies and advertisers are not necessarily equipped to understand that. And so that's where I come in. And I feel that more emphasis needs to be placed on this area, considering how profitable it is. And it will continue to be profitable. And I will leave with that. And thank you so much for including me on this panel.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nathaniel, and then I'd love to turn to Tong next. If there are any specific research questions that come to mind in terms of things that need to be explored to make sure we have a better connection between what actually is helping consumers and what are best practices that we're sort of promulgating across this industry.
Sure. Yeah, I think, I started my opening statement off with, the need to establish a baseline understanding of this practice, right? I think there's a lot of inborn assumptions about the level of understanding, right? I think generally speaking, we as consumers have gotten increasingly skeptical of social media content, and we do assume a lot of promotional and advertising efforts are underway. However, that's an assumption. We need to establish what people are understanding, and if they aren't, how can we help them? And so we can, look at recent research and, a variety of native advertising influencer context and apply those tools to this particular context and see how it plays out. And that's a very good starting point, in particular, looking at disclosures, both in verbal and written and audio forms. We know that not everyone consumes social media content with volume on, right? In fact, a lot of my students in my class, unfortunately, probably consume social media with volume off. And so the effectiveness of an auditory disclosure will go out the window. And so there needs to be a very nuanced effort at developing disclosures to account for these particular consumer behaviors that will continue to be underway.
Great. Thank you so much, Nathaniel, and thank you for taking the time. This does remind me sort of other features, on these sites or on phones where users are interacting with this promotional content, like grayscale for late night viewing, or quickly scrolling through, only consuming sort of a very brief portion at the top. So really interesting to understand, like, how does that interplay with adequately conveying information that consumers need to see in this space.
Absolutely. Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. Tong, I'd like to turn to you next.
Sure, thanks. So yeah, thanks for this discussion. I have two comments to add to what we discussed just before. One, so the promoted speaker events, like Sneha mentioned, actually CMS maintain a website called Open Payment, where you can search by company's name, by drug's name, as well as by doctor's name. And they have very detailed documentation of if somebody traveled to somewhere to speak for promotional events for certain drug identified by NDC, National Drug Code. What's useful to know that all the information collected on this website are considered legal. So it's totally okay. And to have some form of promotional or endorsement relationship between healthcare professionals and companies. What's concerning is, first of all, majority of people I talk to, they're not aware of this website. They have no intention or whatsoever to go online and have a look. And second, even though they decide to take a look, it's hard to make a correct interpretation of many pieces of information there. Because for one, people might develop unnecessary mistrust against certain healthcare professionals. But it's useful to know that for the whole nation, more than 93% of the healthcare professionals hold some kind of relationships with pharmaceutical companies or medical device companies. So it's hard to interpret what it really means. if you happen to find somebody who does not have any kind of relationship with any companies, that might be a signal of something else rather than conflict of interest. So that's one comment I would like to share. Another comment is to follow up on what Dr. Goodkoff just shared. I really want to champion and say thank you for all of your healthcare professionals to be able to willingly come online and share useful and scientifically backed information, especially during this era of misinformation. I also run a line of research looking at online misinformation, and some of the other researchers in this domain have found that more than half of the most spreaded videos about ADHD on TikTok contains misleading statement or very clear misinformation. And the problem there is kind of twofold. One, there probably isn't enough correct information on such social media platforms to start with. And two, for those types of misinformation, they have certain types in terms of the content design to make them more easily to go viral. They may capitalize on appeal to fear or become more enjoyable, more out of surprise. So even if we start with enough correct content on social media, it remains an interesting research question how we can promote these correct content effectively so that they can compete with all the misleading content. To that end, I think have professional influencers in joining in this domain for public education, scientific education could be one very useful approach to think about. So really, thank you for all the doctors who are willing to take time out from their busy schedule to do these free public education online.
Thanks so much, Tong. Before I turn, I know Sneha has a quick question to jump in with, but Adam, would love to hear, I think this just reminds me of the thread we were hoping to pull on disclosures of authenticity and how those might play a role in sort of helping patients and consumers and healthcare providers navigate information that's being shared in these spaces a little while. So any thoughts you have there, would love to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tong, I appreciate those comments. And I think it's worth noting as a physician, and we all have, anyone who can prescribe, by the way, has an NPI number. That NPI number is trackable and can be assigned for these open payments. And something that's interesting, a lot of physicians that maybe truly don't have a financial relationship with pharma, if they show up to an office where you are present, even as a resident, so in training, you may never interact with the pharma rep, but if your NPI is collected, you will be assigned that cup of coffee that was left under your name, and it may show $2.56, but they will still show up. And so that is not to say, if someone has a $200,000 payment, right, that's a whole other discussion to go into outside of this, but it is quite detailed as to what the I think, within reason for what they can collect as to what was reported, but it is also sometimes alarming to see how broad that is, to the point that you may not even realize you're being compensated and may have had no contact at all, which is probably not the intention, but it's worth noting in this context. And, as to disclosures and authenticity, I think, Tong was speaking very accurately to this. I think that when we have kind of working groups among HCPs who are interested in this space, when we have working groups among those who are, building these platforms, these social platforms, it's very difficult to moderate this. And so the answer effectively becomes, try to fight fire with fire and put more accurate content out there. But all of the points made were correct. It's very difficult we've heard and talked about providing the appropriate level of information to your training and the appropriate level of engagement that should come from a physician or a nurse practitioner, whoever is giving that information. The structure of how virality works on social media makes that very challenging for you to disclose your title, your expertise, the topic you're going to speak about alone. You've probably already lost the hook in the way that the AI functions on these platforms to feed content to others. And so HCPs who are interested in this space do feel in a way, deflated that they'll make and invest time in a video after clinic, after hospital, whatever that is, which will only get 1,000 views. And someone else will make a video that is clearly inaccurate and will get 10 million views, right? And so, it's effectively, using your kitchen sink to try to put out a forest fire. But the more HCPs that get on there, the more tools that we have in place to lend credibility to that. And of course, there's an element of self-policing as well. And from disclosure, I think HCPs, have felt that for years, right? There's a whole host of mistrust around pharma and the relationship between physicians and the public. And I think HCPs as a whole do a pretty good job in terms of self-policing. And for big academic meetings, disclosures are incredibly important. And I think back to the open payment data, just because someone was paid, even a larger sum of money, right? They have a consulting fee, for example. Those are often the larger values there. It's not necessarily, it's never a bad payment, so to speak, but you may have been in on an ad board to weigh in on your experience on treating patients in a particular condition, right? It may have actually no impact on an actual drug prescription. So not every interaction that a physician has with pharma is going to be directly tied to a prescription medication, which I think is worth noting as well. So hopefully that adds some commentary to it.
Great, thank you so much. And before we do some sort of final comments from folks, as we're getting near the end, Sneha, I did want to turn to you. I know that you had a question.
Yeah, I can actually loop my final comments in with this question too, if that's helpful, just for the sake of time. I think as far as research is concerned, I'd be so curious to know. I really struggle with, particularly with Gen Z and our demographic on social media. We struggle with being told what to do, rather instead we should be told how to think about things. And so I think there's this mistrust that we have with authorities or influencers that tell us what's right and wrong, instead how we should be thinking about things. And I think that's the role of the FDA and other influencers out there, is to really think critically about evidence and how we should be thinking about that, not what to think about that. I also am just very struck by the fact that a lot of these medications, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but quite a few of these medications don't have public evidence or evidence publicly displayed. Like in multidisciplinary reviews, a lot of this information is redacted. And so when we're advertising prescription medications and thinking about making sure patients have access to the full information about it, I think that's just a really important point for me personally, because I went online to see my own prescription medication, knowing that some even adverse events were redacted. So if I'm seeing a medication online and not having the full picture about it, I think that's very concerning. I also think, with all due respect, Dr. Goodkoff too, I think we need to be more clear around influencers and physicians advertising prescription medications. It's one thing to talk about it. It's one thing to do medical education, but it's very scary, because I see this in our demographic about the parasocial relationship that our community can carry with, what are trusted people, and to have that feels very scary to me. The last thing I'll just say is that I think it's really important for FDA to think more intentionally about research related to specific platforms. Dr. Goodkoff, you mentioned virality, which is huge. There's a advertisement for a migraine medication that has over 200 million views, nearly 800,000 likes, has no safety information on it, and has been up there for the last 2+ years. And so when we're thinking about, how are we catching up to speed with these advertisements, but how are we looking at research that has the impact to reach a mass group of patients and people is really scary. And then the last thing I'll just say about the open payments, in the legislation, there actually is a requirement that manufacturers would have to, similar to open payments, disclose who they are doing paid advertising to. And so this creates, I think, more of an opportunity for explicit public disclosure about what's a paid advertisement and what's not. And that's something that we very intentionally tried to put in the legislation, again, to have more clarity in the case that there's no opportunity for standard disclosures. So I'm not sure if I asked my question there, but there were a lot of thoughts, and I have a lot more to say about this too. So.
Great. Thank you so much, Sneha. We really appreciate those. And I think touching on some of the points that you've shared, we did receive a question from the audience that I hope others can think of and maybe answer in their closing comments. But we received a question wondering from each of the panelists, do you think it would be helpful and promote authenticity for influencers and increase trust among their followers to also disclose when they do not have a material connection with a drug company, but want to endorse a drug? So again, that disclosure of authenticity, sort of like how how you know, how important do you think that is to communicate out? How does that really sit with folks? Go ahead, Adam. Yeah, would love to hear from you next.
Yeah, I'm happy to touch on that. And I believe someone can please correct me if I'm wrong. I actually think there is maybe some guidance from the FTC, or I've heard grumblings that there may be some on disclosure of non-sponsorship. So for those who do participate in endorsements, reviews, those type of things, actually saying, you know, for example, I have purchased this product and I have decided to review this myself. I'm not compensated by this company. Again, to increase that authenticity. So I do think that is incredibly important. And then again, just you know, very clear guidelines on text, verbal. The disclosure should be obvious when there is a partnered program. And so I do think that that is important to increase authenticity. And Tori, did you want kind of closing comments now as well? I'm happy to. Yeah, you know, the one thing I'd roll in, and we didn't get a chance to touch on this, but something that I hear a lot of feedback from the digital opinion leaders in this space is a desire to provide that important safety information, that fair balance, in a more organic way. A lot of folks feel that we're breaking that relationship or trust, and actually, you know, by way losing authenticity by all of a sudden finishing this kind of personalized messaging to a voice that feels comfortable to the particular HCP, to all of a sudden, you know, rambling off a script of these adverse events. And, you know, we absolutely understand and appreciate why that is a requirement and why that needs to be disclosed. But I think there's definitely interest, and would be very curious to hear the researcher's perspective of is there a way to, you know, more organically incorporate that. I can tell you when I see patients clinically, you know, I don't necessarily list the side effects of a medication by running down the package insert. I have a conversation. Now, obviously, we're not having patient relationships on social media. We're not having direct conversations, but is there a more organic way to provide that information? We heard in the last session about attention, right? And the jarringness of these disclosures. Is there a way to have a more impactful conversation on safety to, you know, again, as Sneha mentioned, these are drugs, they're medications, they have risk with use. And so is there a better way to disclose those? Or maybe not. I think it's kind of my open-ended question that I would be very curious about.
Great. Thank you so much, Adam. Rakia, I'd like to go to you next.
Sure, it's an interesting question. I think from a legal perspective, it'd be difficult to require people to say, I don't have a connection, just from a, you're like putting a burden on them. I'm not, and it would be hard to, what the enforcement mechanism will be for that. But I do think that savvy influencers would know to say that. Kim Kardashian will need to say that every time she is endorsing a product on her own, because people presume she has been paid, with all fairness to her. But you know what I mean? There's certain people for whom, if they want you to really know, you probably would need to say that. Otherwise, there's a presumption in that context. It's a very interesting concept. I mean, arguably, these platforms are meant to exist so that you should assume if you don't disclose the material connection, it's your own thought, but there's a reality that there's distrust in that. And so, you know, how to address that is a great question. For closing thoughts, I just want to encourage more, I'm sure it's already happening, discussion between FDA and the FTC on how to handle this. And there are statutory fixes that are legislative fixes that are being proposed. I think that it's helpful for everyone to talk to each other to see what guidance already exists and how there can be more alignment. And I think that'll make it also easier for stakeholders to comply, but also have more efficacious change to protect the public.
Great, thanks so much. And then last but not least, Tom.
So thank you. My closing idea, I'll put it an open-ended question as well. So it seems like we all agree on disclosure is a beneficial thing. However, we also agree that there are so much nuances going on in different markets where we should pay more attention. So ideally, in an ideal world, we could tailor our disclosure regulation to those nuances of that particular market. Now, on healthcare market, particularly when we think about pharmaceutical market, prescription drugs on social media, it's a complex product. And I quite empathize with what Dr. Goodkoff mentioned, that the way doctors interact with patients is important. So it's not just providing all these specifications as you're shopping around for a camera and you ask the patient to make comparisons themselves and then come to a conclusion. There has to be a management of this consumer relationship component in this patient-doctor interaction or more broadly medical education on social media. So I'm wondering if, on the one hand, we can consider some theoretical tools from research that looks into consumer relationship management, sales relationship management, that could borrow some insights to how we could manage this doctor-expert-patient relationship more effectively on social media. Now, on the other hand, talking about the feasibility, we have all these AI tools nowadays, which provides both opportunities to expand the scale that a medical expert can interact with more patient, as well as potential risk that it would put a bigger challenge on the content control over what your AI chatbot or AI supporters assistant could do out there. Regardless, that's what's going on all these social media. Influencers are using these AI tools to help them with content creation as well as content addition. So that remains as a related concern when we think about all potential misleading information going on social media, especially for a market with very complex product and service, such as medical market. I'll leave it as an open-ended question for all of us to think about.
Great. Thank you so much, Shang, for leaving us with even more to think about as we leave this excellent half day's worth of programming. I just want to thank all the panelists from the session, as well as the session before, for your insightful comments. And I do want to take a moment just close us out from the day. I really appreciate everyone who stuck around with us for the little bit of extra bonus time. So we'll go ahead and move to closing and adjournment. Many thanks to our panelists and attendees for such an engaging event. There's certainly a lot to discuss in this space. It's not, not a space where we really lack questions to really talk about. A lot of research opportunities, I think, came up throughout the conversation today, and really hope folks are able to kind of take those back home and give them some thought. I do want to thank everyone for their contributions, including some additional people who are not on screen today who helped make this event possible. I'd like to thank the FDA staff for playing an instrumental role in planning this meeting. This meeting was truly a joint effort, so many thanks to Jason Kober, Shannon Sparklin, Sapna Shah, and Katie Gray. And then I would also like to thank the Duke-Margolis team, Maddie Cordell, Nancy Allen-Lapointe, Hannah Vitello, Luke DeRocher, and then also Mia Williams for all their efforts today, as well as all the days leading up to the event. As a reminder, additional meeting materials will be posted on the Duke-Margolis website in the coming days, including a recording of this workshop. And thank you again for such a wonderful event, and hope everyone has a great rest of the afternoon.